sure that I got this. All right, here we go. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. Super excited to be here to talk about Porto. Some people have talked about it earlier today. This is going to go into more about the motivations, how we built it, why we built it, and what you can do with it today. But first, I wanted to give some context into my background. I've been working on developer tools for the past few years, primarily WAGMI VM and other developer tools that fall under our WebM umbrella. More recently, I've been working with Ithaca on Porto, which is the library that some people have talked about today, and we'll talk about more here. Before developer tools, I worked on various apps. The only reason I bring this up is just because that apps sort of inspired me to work on developer tools, and you can learn a lot from users and how you build your developer tools by making sure that you're solving problems for developers, if that's your audience, or users. And also, lastly, I'm very opinionated about what I work on, and sometimes those opinions don't always match with what other people have. And so, if you disagree with something in this talk, we'd love to chat with you after, and we can keep the discussion going. So how do you go about building a developer tool? First of all, it must solve a problem that you have. Usually, as a developer, you're solving your own problem. You've worked with some tools, and maybe if you're a day job or something, and you've been frustrated, it's taken a lot of time to do something, and so that is when you kind of know that, okay, I'm having an issue, maybe there's something there. An example of this is I was working building crypto apps, and I wasn't having a great experience. I was spending more time debugging wallet connections and how to send transactions than I was actually building my apps. And so that was kind of where the spark of WAGMI came from. I didn't know if I was going to be able to build anything better, but I had a hunch that I should try to look into it and figure out why the tools that existed weren't working very well. In crypto apps, often we maybe overcomplicate what we're solving. And so an example of this is if you're someone, in this case, you're eating and you need to clean your face after you eat, there's maybe a few different ways you can solve that problem. And if this was a crypto engineer solving it, you'd build this really complex mechanism just to have something to do it, when in reality, maybe there's a really simple solution, which is just a napkin. And so sometimes tools can seem really complex, but if you spend a lot of time experimenting, you can get to a place that where things kind of make more sense. And so the next step is, once you have a problem that you want to solve, is you have to build a bunch of different experiments. Usually you don't want to build the whole thing right away because you spend all this time without validating that you're actually able to make something better. And then after you experiment, you hone those experiments. Maybe you try out the newest tech and libraries, make sure stuff is compatible and works well. And then if it's good enough and it meets your quality bar, then you can release it. And this is what we've done with WAGMI and a bunch of other tools that we use. And so what problem are we trying to solve here in this case? What problem is Porto trying to solve? So the UX of crypto has improved a lot over the last few years. It might be imperceivable to many of you that have been in the space for a while, but it undoubtedly has. Before, if you listened to Georgios' talk earlier, there was a lot of stuff that you had to do, and each step, you would have to have crazy activation energy to get over the bar. And nowadays, things work. They don't usually break, but there's so many options out there. So even the best products that lots of people use, like ENS, if you want to go to ENS and use it for the first time or coming back to use it, you're presented with a bunch of different options for how to get started. And maybe this is good because you use one of these options and you can quickly find it and identify it, but for new users or other people, it's just a lot of choice, and you have to make decisions, maybe install some extensions and stuff to get started. So we can improve this a little bit more. Some sites like Uniswap, which is really popular, have decided to kind of trim down the options quite a bit. There's the case here where they're trimming down the options so they can show their options that they control and want to push you towards, which maybe is a little bit of a negative. But the nice thing is you don't really need to look through a bunch of options. These are the ones. And from a developer perspective, it is kind of great to make sure that you're controlling the experience. If users that use your app, if there's everyone's using a different wallet and has like a different experience. You're not able to make sure that the quality bar is super high. So my like spicy take would be that I think in the future we should, we should support less options. That the downside of that is, you can't use the long tail wallets, but those don't always work with different sites. So if all your users have the same nice experience, it's predictable, you know how they're using it, you can build really solid experiences end to end. And so my pitch would be that you would use Porto, but if you don't use Porto, you should just use like one other thing. And so what you also kind of see in this period is like people will switch to having the Web3 options, which are recognizable, but then also because maybe those are annoying for users to download and set up, you see like the familiar options for someone that's coming without knowledge of how to use crypto. And so you see like OAuth options, email, stuff like that, which is great for maybe initial onboarding quickly, but then the problem you run into is these options aren't funded. They're coming with like a zero wallet balance, and then you need to figure out how to onboard crypto for those users too. And so Porto is our attempt to solve a bunch of these issues. Before today, how many people had heard of Porto? Okay, cool. And then also used Porto. Okay, yeah, maybe a little bit less. So Porto is a tool we released recently that aims to solve some of these problems. It has like the one jargony crypto description is an end-to-end account stack from contracts to JavaScript. And what that really means is it's auth plus payments. These are things that most apps need. They need to have their users log in, identify themselves, maybe not like, KYC, know who they are, but like have like a user ID somewhere in the database. And then payments, being able to like pay for services, transfer value, stuff like that. You can enable Porto really easily in your WAGMI apps just by installing the Porto package on NPM, importing the library, using the namespace to call Porto create. That's like the table stakes, really basic way to get set up. And we'll talk about other ways you can hook into cool Porto features like sponsoring and stuff like that later. The rest of this talk is going to kind of be a little bit more about the user-facing bits, how Porto works together. And there also are like a ton of great team members here that are wearing like the green badges that you should talk to learn more about like the lower level stuff, like the RPC server, contracts, how everything works together. I'm going to try to do it justice, but the rest of the team is incredible, so you should try to find and talk to those people as well. What is auth and payments? It's kind of like a final boss, each one. Like auth, extremely hard. There's billion-dollar companies that work on auth. Payments, extremely hard. There's billion-dollar companies that work on payments. Porto is trying to tackle both them, but it's not trying to tackle the long tail of all the auth and payments problems. It won't do, at least right now and probably for a while, it won't do things like SAML, Active Directory. It won't allow you to do merchant refunds, tracking inventory at this moment. It just really handles, we give you an authenticated user, and you manage that user in your database. We give you a key for, you can use for subscriptions, but you have to then, have a serverless function or like a, some cron process that charges that key. And so for auth, Porto handles the glue of like auth and authorization. For payments, Porto handles like the on-ramping piece, maybe some sourcing liquidity for payments across chains in the future, and then most importantly, like executing your calls that you've signed with your Porto wallet. No API key is required. You can just get started with v0 or on your own, just install the package. And since Porto is just JavaScript functions, you can kind of similar if you've used VM or WAGMI before, everything's super composable. You can kind of configure stuff to work how you want it to. So why even spend our time doing this? We built a lot of developer tools. Why would we want to go in and build something else that spends a lot of time and is probably even harder than building Foundry or Ref or WAGMI or VM in and of itself? And the first thing is like we have this problem ourselves, like wanting to use apps. Being app builders, we've built a lot of stuff in the past. We work with a lot of app builders, and we see the problems they're going through. And probably the first thing is like new technology enables a lot of stuff. Like we're really interested in passkeys. We think they're a big improvement for crypto and non-crypto use cases. We can debate whether or not passkeys are good or not. I'm sure some people are skeptical and don't think they're going to be useful. A lot of those constraints are just like the tech is good, but like browsers don't have solid support across all of them, and there's some UI, UX issues with that as well. And passkeys use two things that you always have with you. One of them is your phone. The other is your face or like your fingerprint and stuff. So you don't have to worry about like figuring out like your password or where you put it or how to get into an account and stuff like that. Especially for like mainstream users. Like everyone's pretty comfortable at this point with like Apple Pay, scanning their face, signing into an app with Face ID, things like that. So we needed this SDK for some app ideas we wanted to build. And maybe we wouldn't have decided to build this if this was our first developer tools experience, but we feel pretty confident that like we're able to build stuff that we would use, and maybe we can experiment a bunch and generalize, and other people like using it too. And Porto, we've been working on it for 8 or 9 months, and like most of our tools, we love to iterate on them in public on GitHub. And so if things aren't exactly where we want them to be or where users want them to be, we keep working on them and make them better until they're so good that everyone wants to use them. And so yeah, Porto's kind of been this exercise in like speedrunning the account abstraction stack over like the past 9 months. We've kind of discarded like the years, maybe learned from it, but discarded like the actual tech stack that has existed for like and people have been working on for the past few years, and wanted to build stuff from like first principles and scratch. So what did the last 9 months look like? Yeah, if you were talking about like maybe this hypothesis that we're going to speed run the stack, like how do we actually do that? And it comes down to like the whole like process of how you build developer tools. And the most important thing is experimenting. Like we have a hunch that we think what we're going to build is going to be compelling and like work well, but like we don't actually know until we start experimenting. And because the scope of it is so big, like you have to conduct small experiments where you're able to like continually like test the hypothesis. Otherwise, like you spend like months, years building without any actual users, and then you don't know. So in October, we did an experiment that's called account delegation. And this was an experiment with passkeys. Can you create a passkey? Or I guess first you generate a private key in the browser, and then you'd create a passkey. You'd sign an authorization, which would then you would submit and give the passkey access to that account to be able to control it. And then at the very end, you'd forget the private key. The private key would be forgotten in the browser, and no one would have access to it. And so now that passkey controls the account, and you can have some really nice experiences where instead of like having to download a separate wallet, browser extension, and then have a bunch of prompts, you can just sign a transaction with your fingerprint or face. Building on that, in November, we decided to do an experiment with something more like session keys. So people get prompt fatigue for signing a bunch of transactions, and if certain transactions are more lightweight, you could think of this as like maybe like a like for like micropayments or something on an app. It's kind of annoying to be constantly prompted with actions like that. So this was an experiment where we created like a non-extractable P256 key in the browser again, and that would be authorized to then maybe spend like a certain amount of funds or perform like a more lightweight action for a user. In December, we took these two experiments together and packaged it up into like an NPM package that anyone could use. It was a more basic package that kind of just dealt with Porto in the browser communicating with some contracts on its own. And then in February, we used that package to create like a more robust product-like experience for subscriptions. So you could imagine like subscribing to like an app or subscribing to a newsletter and paying them $10 a month. And so what would happen here is you'd create a key as an app developer on your server. That would get signed over, and you would grant permissions to it. through Porto, and then once that is granted the permissions, you can then use it and charge it on a regular basis, maybe $10 a month or $100 a year to deduct your funds. And in May, we continued to bundle this all up together, and we added a really cool RPC server on the back end, which handles a bunch of estimation, call execution. It makes stuff really fast, and yeah, so that was in May. And so ultimately, we built something that looks like this. You have Porto, which is the JavaScript SDK. It's an iframe, or there's another form factor, which is just a pop-up window, if you want to do that, which shows up in your app. So the user doesn't have to install anything. They can easily connect, sign, grant permissions. And the other cool thing is the passkeys are global, so they use the Porto relying party ID. So if you create an account using Porto on a certain app and then go to another app that supports Porto, your account is the same for all of them, which is kind of cool. So yeah, most developers are interacting with the Porto SDK. It's an NPM package they can install and use it in their app. Behind the scenes, which basically powers a lot of what Porto does, is this RPC server, which does things like call execution. Porto sends it its calls. It figures out how to execute them as fast as possible and get them included as soon as possible. And then also does some really cool stuff, or at least in the future, where you can pay fees in any coin. It calls out to the Porto backend for sponsorship and things like that. And then we have some really powerful contracts behind the scenes, too, which communicate back and forth. If you didn't want to use the RPC, you could also use the contract mode in the Porto SDK, and that communicates directly. But the RPC is great because it speeds everything up and enables a bunch of features that you wouldn't have automatically in the contracts. So yeah, let's break down what a user sees, what happens from their perspective. So you can imagine this is a fictional, Substack or Medium blogging app where you need to subscribe to read articles. There's a few different players here. There's the user, there's the application, and then there's Porto, which is I'm grouping together the SDK, the server, the contracts, everything in one for simplicity. And then the developer of the application also has a little API server that they have running to handle some stuff. So the user navigates to a blog post. Maybe they've seen it on Twitter or something like that. They want to read this article, but they find out that it's paywalled. But it looks really cool, so they're willing to do it. So what happens is they click a button that the developer has wired up in the app, which then opens the Porto dialog iframe. And you can show a few different things here. This app developer decides that they want to batch a bunch of stuff together. So they want the user to be able to either create an account or log in with their existing account that they've logged in on this site before or another site. And they also want them to be able to pay for the subscription in the single prompt too. And so if they don't have funds, they'll need to on-ramp as well. And so behind the scenes, in this request to create the subscription and log in, the developer sends a key that they've generated to the browser, which Porto will sign and then give it access to bill for the subscription. And so the user just hits confirm in the Porto dialog, or log in or sign up. If they don't have an account balance, they'll go through an on-ramping flow with Apple Pay. Let's assume that they do. Porto grants the permissions to the server key. Behind the scenes, once the application server receives the granted permissions, it can then bill the key $10 and then refresh the UI, and then the user can read the blog post. And so there's a lot of stuff that's happening below the application behind the scenes, but what the user sees is really just 3 clicks. They navigate to the site, they click subscribe, they see a prompt, they click login and subscribe. Maybe they go through an on-ramping flow, and then they can read the article. It's pretty fast, and a little bit easier experience than if you had to show up to the site and download a browser extension, like maybe on-ramp or send funds from like a different app, and then figure out, like, get another prompt, which was for like the permission to bill you. So yeah, I think it's pretty good. And this is like the point of the talk where, I've been building this for like 8 or 9 months, and like I think it's really cool, and it involves like tons of extra code that I'm gonna try to like convince you that like you really should add it because it'll make your app better. And this is what happens in crypto all the time. Like, you're too close to the problem, you haven't validated it, and it kind of like creates this cult of like trying to buy into the technology and not really understanding that it helps the user. But in reality, it looks more like this to use Porto. If you're using WAGMI, it's super easy. It's literally 3 lines. You're going to install the npm package, so that's like 1 line of code that ends up being in your package JSON or in your terminal. You're going to import the Porto WAGMI connector, and then you're going to add it to your connectors array. That's all you have to do to use Porto. And what that enables is your users won't have to go install a browser extension. They won't need to figure out how to transfer funds to this wallet. They can use like a built-in on-ramp inside of Porto. And yeah, all they have to do is use this app, and they can use it on mobile, on desktop. All they need to do is have a passkey, can sign transactions with their face. And this also enables a lot for you as a developer, too. Do you want to sponsor transactions for your users? My argument is every app, especially if it's like a money-making app, should sponsor their transactions, just as the cost of doing business for like a good experience. So Porto has this merchant RPC request handler that you can add to your Next.js function or your Cloudflare worker, and you can configure it to a bunch of different things. But one of them is there is a sponsors function property that you can add, and it's a really simple concept. If you return true from that, it will sponsor the function. If you return false, it doesn't sponsor it. And you can do a bunch of async work in there. You can check the address against an allow list. You can maybe check the accounts balance. You could go into your database, grab database row, see how old this account is, and decide to sponsor it if it meets certain criteria. So it is really powerful. And the nice thing is, you just set up this function, and the RPC server will call it on the back end for you. So you don't have to run any extra infrastructure other than just this one serverless function. Another example of something that Porto does is connects in with sign-in with Ethereum or other auth solutions that you have. And so if you're using WAGMI, you can just continue using the use connect hook like you would before. Or I guess right now we have a special one from Porto, but at some point that will be upstreamed into WAGMI. And you have all of your API, which sets up all the auth routes that are required for sign-in with Ethereum, or other auth routes. Maybe you're using Better Auth, which Porto works with as well. And then when you call connect in your application, you pass a sign-in with Ethereum capability with an auth URL, and then Porto will automatically call that during the login flow, and you'll get an authenticated user out of that. So you'll know that they're the one that controls the Porto wallet. OK, so maybe you're building an app today at the hackathon, or when you go back after the conference, and there's some mechanisms that general patterns and mechanisms that you can use in Porto to make that are just key things that you can follow. One of them is the passkey sign up really fast. If you're building an app, and you have the soup of existing options right now, you support browser wallets, Rainbow, Wallet Connect, all this stuff. I would recommend trying it out and adding this, especially for new users, and seeing if they can sign up faster and using your app without having to do a lot of extra work. The other nice thing is once a lot of people start using Porto too, you'll be able to benefit from these global accounts. So users will be able to go from one app to another with balances and be able to go between them very easily. Another great use case is subscriptions. So it's the really simple idea of you give Porto a server key that gets authorized, and then you can use it later to perform actions. That can be used for I guess different billing models, The key can be used, if you want to do lightweight actions in your app. So there's a bunch of different options for that. Another is one-time payments. Historically in crypto, one-time payments have been really frictionful. You've had to have someone sign up, download a bunch of stuff, on-ramp, these things. We have this idea of a guest checkout coming, which allows you to defer creating an account, so you don't have to create the passkey yet, but allows you to Apple Pay, which then gets sent into an account that's just in time, and then that gets charged. So there's a few different models that you can do. One of them is a Substack Patreon-style subscription thing. You can have lightweight actions involved with that too, like micropayments for tipping. Another is a Shopify-style storefront with one-time payments and a guest checkout. We're working really hard with our on-ramp partners to support a KYC-less on-ramp up to $500, so it's super smooth. $500 lifetime. And then another example of how powerful Porto is you can just build an entire wallet in Porto. So Porto will just be the headless functions that you can then use. And then you can build a wallet on your front end, which allows you can build in features like swapping and stuff, use session keys to make it really easy for people to perform actions without having to sign every time. So yeah, the recap is Porto is just basic auth and payments right now. Things that it can help out with are onboarding with global accounts, on-ramping. And the other case is programmable payments. So if you want to buy into the basic concept of having a key for everything and being able to charge your accounts and have stuff be really fast and frictionless for users, then you can check out Porto. And yeah, if you have any questions, happy to answer them. We have we have a developer chat. You can go to the docs, and we're on GitHub as well.
You mentioned KYC. Is that something that you would handle inside the UI for Porto? And then also, are there any plans to do the reverse of checkout, withdraw to Apple Pay, bank, whatever?
Yeah. So as far as KYC relates, we're not handling any of that right now. Our whole goal is to have a frictionless on-ramp experience with no KYC up to $500 lifetime. And then, after you hit that $500 lifetime, it's still being figured out what to do. But the ideal is first-time payments. User shows up to the app, they can onboard, buy something really easily. Once they surpass that, we're going to need to figure it out. Probably work with partners. We're not going to do that stuff on our own, likely. And then your other question. Oh, withdraw, yeah. So Porto has this idea of merchant accounts. You saw that with the merchant RPC request handler. And so yeah, we'll be building a suite of tools for your merchant account, which is also a Porto account. What do you do with funds in that? You can sponsor directly from the merchant account. Maybe you can off ramp. Maybe you can pay people, stuff like that.
Hello, Manny here.
Where are you?
Right in front of you.
Oh, okay.
So if I recall correctly, the whole benefit of Porto is that it's an entire infrastructure with the contracts, et cetera. Is there a goal to have other EVM chains supported, or is the goal for other chains to kind of deploy this themselves for that infra? And I do have a second question, and I think Georgios mentioned that there's a sense of modules potentially. Is that something that's coming? Maybe an idea of intent-based bridging to be faster on-ramping, et cetera. So yeah, those are two questions.
Yeah, chain support comes up a lot. As far as non-EVM chains go, maybe at some point, really focused on doing a job on EVM stuff right now. And then in terms of breaking apart Porto into separate pieces, we think it works really well together, end to end. I think there are some probably tools that we built or pieces of the stack that people would benefit from on their own, and we might break those up as needed. But yeah, I would love to hear more what specifics, or if anyone has specific pieces of Porto that they think can solve their problem, yeah, it'd be good to chat about more. So, thanks.
Right, so the one takeaway from this talk is use Porto. It's feature complete, has best-in-class onboarding. For intent-based interop, the last question, we have been building on it, and we have some limited preview access to it. We have demonstrated it working between OP and base mainnet, where you can get one-click instant going from one chain to another without having to figure out anything bridging related. So I think it's awesome. It's a full suite of tools. You should build something with it, with V0 or not.